Can everyone hear me? Super, okay. I know everyone's just coming back from lunch and a little bit groggy. My presentation has lots of pictures. It's a little bit technical too. It'll be a little bit fast-paced, but I think everyone can keep up with it. As Kim was alluding to, I did recently graduate from a program that people mentioned, UBC's Masters in Land and Water Systems program. And through that, I grew up in Richmond. I was kind of asking a lot of questions, kind of looking at my community through a water lens. That lent itself to interviewing some farmers across the summer about a year ago. And I came upon this concern they have with some of the industrialization that's proposed for the lower Fraser River and how that may impact agriculture. So kind of kept asking questions, and I kind of became involved in some of the work that the local Delta and Richmond Farmers Institutes have been undertaking to make sure that some of their interests and some of their questions are answered through some of these changes that the river is planned to experience. And so this is an intro to my little presentation here today. So this is the bridge as proposed that would take the place of the George Massey Tunnel across the Fraser River between Delta and Richmond. And a little bit of an outline for what I'm planning to talk about today. I'm basically talking about a study that we've been trying to work to have happen. And so that involves knowing a little bit more about the salt wedge, also a little bit about salinity as it relates to agriculture, and getting into what the outline of the study looks like that we're just about to have contracted probably this week. So this is the lower Fraser River, as you may be familiar. We're talking about the Richmond and Delta side of the river. There's a lot of green around there. These two communities are kind of in the Fraser River lowlands, and they both source probably upper 90% of their water supply for agriculture from the Fraser River. It's a pretty convenient water supply source. And moving on, this is what the ALR looks like in Metro Vancouver. And so ALR, agricultural land, makes up a little less than 5% of BC's total land mass. Locally in Metro Vancouver, this represents about less than 1.5% of BC's agricultural land. Yet the revenues generated are over a quarter, 25% of the province's agricultural output, over $800 million in revenues a year. Might actually be higher than that. And the ALR in Vancouver represents about 21% of land. ALR in Richmond is about 40% of the land. And Delta is over 50%. And some of the challenges are that because it's so low-lying, both communities are surrounded by perimeter dikes and a lot of the water supplied through ditches and irrigation kind of canals. And this is just a typical water demand for an average year. So you can see in the summertime it peaks up and then heads back down. This is actually a projection for the future, but it looks similar to that today. It's just in the future. We're expected to need, say, the next 50 to 80 years, about 50% more water just to produce provide the exact same level of kind of crop production, because it's going to be a little bit hotter and drier. So infrastructure that supports the agriculture of the system should account for how we deliver that water in the future. So moving to that was the demand, talking about water supply, we know that it comes from the Fraser River. This is an image of the Delta side of the river, and you can see some of the more major intakes, which are pump stations that both drain the municipality, but in the summer also can bring water in for agricultural needs. And this is an image from a study that accompanied the South Fraser Perimeter Road that was recently constructed. And some of the compensation for some of the impacts for that road were put towards improving the irrigation system. And a lot of those investments were made around 80th Street. And so most of the system is designed to draw water from this point along the river, and that's actually probably moved a lot of the capacity from kind of the more western stations kind of upriver. And then if you move over here, this is the Richmond side of the river. This is actually East Richmond, where there's more agriculture. And you have 6 Road, 7 Road, and 8 Road, all drawing water from the Fraser River. And moving on to the salt wedge, which is kind of the phenomenon that exists in all estuaries in the world, is that every day, twice a day, you have the tide roll in and roll out. And in our particular estuary, we're talking about the Fraser River. This is from a study from the 1970s, kind of the last time someone took a real vigorous look at the behavior of kind of the salt wedge in the estuary. And you can see that its reaches on the south arm and the north arm are showing these grayed out areas, but depending on the time of the year, you can have saltwater intrusion from around Steveston and Sand Heads to all the way up to maybe Annacis Island and Westminster. And the reason why that shifts is because we have, there's the hydrology specific to our watersheds. We have a lot of snow, we have a lot of ice, and so when that melts in the early spring, we have a lot of fresh water running through the river, and that forces any salt water kind of out back towards the ocean. As the summer progresses, things dry out. We have less river flow, less fresh water, and so the salt intrudes a lot farther up. And if you remember where all of our agricultural intakes are, then that creates some challenges or some management, some operating necessities to address how we source our fresh water. And this is just this shows kind of the average tidal range in this estuary, and all places on Earth have different tides, but we have about an 11-foot swing, and so this influences kind of where the salt wedge goes to, because it's bringing a lot of salt water up with it. This is just from a textbook talking about estuaries. You have theoretical examples. Up here you have what they call a stratified estuary. And this is when the river forcing is particularly strong. It keeps the salt water kind of up towards the toe. And this is an example, the alternate example of a well-mixed estuary. We actually have a lot of flushing and flow and tides. And so there's a lot more mixing. And then nothing behaves like a textbook reality. So our Fraser River actually behaves kind of like a partially mixed estuary, where you have kind of some mixing of strata, and I guess at different times of the year, it may have different intensities of salt water, but this just shows you some of the background theory of what we're talking about. So moving on from salt wedges, just talking about salinity, why it's important, why this is part of our water conversation today. You can see how different crops perform. These are various tolerance levels as they relate to salinity and the water they're able to grow in. Cranberries are a pretty sensitive crop, as well as other berries and some vegetables. And so you have cranberries have an acceptable tolerance for salinity at about 400 microsiemens per centimeter, which is kind of an indirect measure of this conductivity measure that equates to saltiness. And then you have some other grains and more tolerant crops down here around this level. And this is helpful because it helps us set kind of a something to aim for in terms of where to keep water quality for agriculture. So if you see where our cranberry threshold is, it's kind of in the more sensitive areas. If you see where kind of sea level is, being kind of like 100%, it's we need to kind of try to manage the salt pretty well. And these are some charts or some graphs that show some of the studies that have been done already on the Fraser River. This again was taken from a perimeter road study. And this shows you in Delta at the 80th Street station, which I think is on this line here, that the design for this inlet was to maintain a water quality around our kind of established baseline. And you can see in the red graph shows October of 2008 of where the average salinity level was along the river until you get to where the big draw is, and it's kind of within the baseline. And then you see in November that it actually, I guess, was lower in this year. And so you can see where I guess Delta's operations are trying to manage water for agriculture in the area. And then if you look at this one, this is taken from the Richmond side at the number 6 road pump station. And this was in 2011 in August. And I guess the red represents the acceptable level of water. You can see that with the tides coming in and out every day that there's salinity spikes. And in August, water quality was acceptable 70% of the time. And then this is at the same station, but in September, so a month later, you can see even higher spikes. It's a particularly dry time of the year that water quality was only acceptable 25% of the time. So this is what we're already experiencing, not even talking about changes to the river. And moving on to the actual study that we're trying to build. This study is just basically to kind of answer questions about are there areas that are underserved, are there areas that are unserved, maybe the South Arm area of Richmond or Westham Island and Delta. If infrastructure upgrades are needed, when might they be needed? What are the options, what are the costs? And what would it look like if we were to develop a long-term monitoring program to kind of assist some of these decisions? And so the study that's being proposed is a benchmarking study, just saying what's going on right now. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the kind of more exhaustive salt wedge studies happened in the 70s. Maybe people are thinking about water quality from a different perspective, putting wastewater treatment plants in the estuary. And so there hasn't been a lot of holistically looking kind of at the Fraser River from kind of a management perspective. And that's one of the gaps that this study is looking to try to close. So establishing a baseline, doing a sort of sensitivity analysis, what kind of variables impact the salt wedge and its location, how sensitive is it to changes, and kind of modeling those in isolation and in combination. That's what we're looking to do. So as I mentioned before, these are just, I guess, our preliminary examples of where kind of the inlets are that we want to consider for the study, both in Richmond and Delta. There may be a few other spots that we come up with as we kind of talk to our kind of technical team on this. And this is kind of where I catch up with the kind of the climate conversation that we're talking about today, because one of the variables that we'd like to model is what's going to happen in a warming climate. And so this is what our world is doing. This is what's been happening over the past century. This middle line here is our average temperature for the past century. And you can see that all these years are an outlier, meaning how far outside of average are they. You can see that even from the 1970s, it's been consistently, steadily increasing. And 2014 was the warmest year on record. And it's pretty safe to say, I think that this year will be even warmer than that. So the trend is we are definitely warming. And everyone talks about this 2 degrees Celsius limit. Well, we're already 2/3 or 65% of the way there. So this is what's happening. But what's happening in Canada is actually we're experiencing warming a bit faster than the global average, and the northern hemisphere, the Arctic is warming even faster. So in the western Canada and north of Canada, we're closer to 2 or 3 degrees warmer than we were in the past half century. East coast of Canada hasn't warmed as fast, but again, this is getting a little bit more local with climate. And what does this mean for kind of our Fraser River model? Well, historic sea level rise because of the melting ice caps, also just expansion of the ocean because the ocean water is warmer, is that it's steadily been increasing as well. And then in the last few decades, it's actually been accelerating faster than it was. So I think globally the average is about 20 centimeter increase in sea level rise. That may mean different things in kind of local regions, but our province gives us this guidance. So if you're building anything that's any infrastructure that's impacted by sea level or sea level rise, they suggest by the end of the century we plan to have things sea level to be about 1 meter higher than it is today, and in 2 centuries about 2 meters. So if we're looking for 2050, we should have conservatively planned to be about 50 centimeters higher with sea levels. So we'd like to include that as our one of the variables we were trying to model. But climate doesn't just affect sea level, it also affects our watershed. And this is our standard hydrograph for the Fraser River taken at Hope. You have in green the historical average maximums, and in blue the recorded minimums. This red is from 2012. So it just shows you we have, as I was mentioning before, a clear spike with our runoff and our freshet that kind of trickles off over the summer. We're probably more concerned around here with our study because that's the late summer, driest time of the year when we need the most water for agriculture. And so looking at what's happening today, we can look at what the trends have been. And so this is the observed kind of baseline trend for the Fraser River. And you can see that the projections, or the best projections we have or that I could find, are suggesting that it's actually shifting. And so we're having a less defined peak, and we're actually having that peak occur earlier. But at the same time, we're experiencing greater flows. There's actually, we're becoming a little bit wetter, but that isn't all falling at the same time, so there's a lot more variability. So even though we're having a peak that's shifting, there are off years where it can be quite a bit later, and it's just not as reliable. And if you're working in a kind of a really forward-looking or kind of an annual type of an activity like agriculture, if things aren't where they were, it can really be a challenge for what you're trying to do. The third kind of variable, one that's not climate related or kind of a natural change, is what man-made incursions are at the river. And so dredging is the third variable that we're interested in modeling. And this is kind of an exaggerated example of the George Massey Tunnel, which sits under the riverbed. And the proposal is to remove that tunnel, put a bridge across, and so the result would likely be some deeper dredging or the opportunity for deeper dredging. Right now, this is kind of what the navigational channel allows, because the tunnel provides a natural limitation for how deep you want to dredge the river. So for shipping purposes, that depth is kept at 11.5, I shouldn't say feet, or I should say meters, not feet. And with the removal of the tunnel, there's an opportunity for Port Metro Vancouver to dredge deeper or wider or further to serve terminals upstream of the tunnel. Like I mentioned, there's lots of industrialization projects planned or proposed that involve LNG in Delta and jet fuel in Richmond, coal terminals and Surrey Fraser docks. So these are all things that we'd like to kind of include in the model to see like how sensitive is salinity in the river to any types of changes. And so these are just some of the dredging scenarios. You have the Massey Tunnel currently at 11.5 meters. I think there's a request to at least go maybe 1.5 or 2 meters deeper than that as soon as if the tunnel was out. And then going forward, I mean, Panama Canal drafts, they're changing the Panama Canal to deal with set boats that are 18 meters deep, which might be a bit deep for the Fraser River, but other ports in the world have around 16 or 17 meter deep shipping channels. So we'd like to be able to kind of allow our model to suggest what this might mean for the Fraser River. And there may be natural limits to how deep dredging can be. There's economic limits. Is it practical for the cost involved to kind of continue to dredge as deep as some of these indices might mean. There's all the geotechnical limits, how stable are kind of the banks or the banks of the river to handle a wider dredging berth. And there's natural environmental limits. The sediment that is in the Fraser River does supply the foreshore and sturgeon banks, and it's important for even just the stability of kind of parts of Richmond and Delta. So there are some limitations that we want to kind of be able to model all extreme examples of what's going on in the river. And this is just an example of another place in the world that has some of these same questions, and they have put a lot of resources and thought into studying and knowing a lot more about their water system. This is from the Bay Delta Live website, and this is in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River system in Central California. And the interesting thing is this river is under a lot of pressure because we all know that the Central Valley of California provides so much agriculture and so much produce. We probably need some of it here today. But 2/3 of the water in the state falls in the north of the state, north of this river, and 2/3 of the water that's used in the state is used south of this river. So there's incredible diversions for agricultural needs and kind of urban needs, industrial needs. There's actually pump stations on this river that are so strong that they can actually reverse the flow of the river at times. So it's heavily managed, and this is just an example of one of the tools that they use This is, I think there's about 300 separate monitoring stations that provide kind of real-time data to this online dashboard. And it can provide data up to the nearest 15 minutes. Salinity is just one of dozens of variables that are being reported and used by both people involved in agriculture, involved in the water supply, needs for all of these communities along the river. And there's also strong ecological reasons for why they try to manage their river and their salinity system. So we don't have to do all the things they do. There's probably a lot more pressures and tensions involved in managing this river than there is in the Fraser River, but we can learn from some of their best practices and lessons learned, and if we wanted to build something like this, that if that was useful to our kind of local needs, there's an opportunity there too. I think I'm moving through the better part of this presentation. And so working with the Delta Farmers Institute, we're doing a modeling study. When that's completed in the next 3 to 4 months, we're going to look at what it might mean in terms of establishing a short-term monitoring program that provides some kind of baseline calibration data just to assist the model that's been run. And if it makes sense to kind of carry forward with that, then there's an opportunity there. But this type of information will definitely help out kind of our local long-term planning for agriculture. It'll probably be beneficial to the relationship of the Delta farmers groups, Richmond farmers groups, Port Metro Vancouver, all these other stakeholders in the region, and also conservation interests, First Nations fisheries. All these groups are interested in the outcomes of what this study might be able to provide. And that's it. I think I'm on to Ted. And so this is just an introduction to the supply of water in our local region, Lower Fraser River. And Ted's going to focus on more of the demand and what agriculture needs. Thank you.